What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to offer my spoiler-free review for Anatomy of a Fall, which I saw yesterday at a press screening at the New York Film Festival. The official festival doesn't get underway until next Friday, but they've been hosting press screenings since Wednesday. But I saw 3 movies yesterday: Anatomy of a Fall, Pedro Almodovar's 30-minute short Strange Way of Life, as well as Jonathan Glazer's Zone of Interest. And I have to say, my festival experience so far is off to a roaringly good start. And I think I've been attending the festival more or less for about 10 or 11 years. And this year has as strong a slate of movies that I can remember since I first started attending the festival. And the good news is I still have many movies to look forward to that I'm excited to see. But let's start with Anatomy of a Fall, which opens in the U.S. on October 13th, courtesy of distribution by Neon. And it won the much-coveted Palme d'Or at this year's Cannes Film Festival. I always feel a little pretentious saying Palme d'Or as well as Cannes, or I think it's Cannes, but I don't speak French. Y'all tell me. I feel like I'm either pretentious or wrong, no matter how I say those words. But Anatomy of a Fall is a courtroom drama about a death that could either be an accident, a murder, or a suicide. And once again, no spoilers. I'm not going to ruin this story for you because this is a delightfully unpredictable movie. It absolutely lives up to the hype as advertised, and it's that rare thing in the kind of festival circuit where you expect a lot of kind of pretentious, like overly serious, complex dramas. But this movie more or less plays like a crowd pleaser, or at least it plays like a crowd pleaser next to Zone of Interest, which is a tough sit, especially after watching Anatomy of a Fall. But you might be asking who created Anatomy of a Fall, and it's a filmmaker I was totally unfamiliar with prior to seeing this flick, but it was directed by Justine Triet, if I'm saying her name correctly, and it was written by Justine Triet as well as Arthur Harari. And what impressed me most about this movie is how they managed to take the most tired scenario imaginable, basically a mysterious death followed by a courtroom drama. We've all read a million books or seen a million shows or seen a million movies that more or less have the exact same premise. But this movie takes that basic premise and just makes it soar. I was absolutely riveted every step of the way, and I never really made up my mind about the final outcome until deep into the movie. And I suspect this movie is going to play really well when it opens up in specialty theaters around the country in a few weeks' time. To what degree it can cross over to the multiplex, that remains to be seen, but I imagine the same crowd that showed up for Park Chan-wook's movie Decision to Leave last year, that is the same crowd that's going to enjoy this flick. While the two movies are very different in tone, very different in style, and very different in their goals and ambitions, but they're very similar in the respect that they take a conventional plot device, turn it upside down, and make it feel brand new. And it helps quite a bit that this movie is beautifully shot. It's absolutely stunning to look at. But the real feature attraction here is both the writing as well as the acting. And for American audiences where we've been conditioned for kind of a lot of dumbed down pop culture. I mean, let's face it, a lot of our pop culture is created for people, or the kind of people that walk into a theater 10 minutes late, chew their popcorn with their mouth open, talk throughout the entire movie while constantly checking their phones. Like, they're not completely, totally absorbed by what they see or interested in what they see, and that's just the sad reality of our pop culture landscape. But every once in a while, a filmmaker comes along and just says fuck it, and decides to make some smart entertainment for an adult audience that can appreciate a truly electrifying screenplay with a lot of surprises, a lot of twists, a lot of nuance, a lot of subtlety, as well as an incredibly dynamic ensemble cast that has the talent and the chops to bring that screenplay to life. And this was my first exposure to filmmaker Justine Triet, but I will be watching all of her movies from now on. But it was not my first exposure to the star Sandra Hüller, if I'm saying her name correctly. She's from Germany. I looked up how to pronounce it online, and they pronounced it with an American accent. Sandra Hüller. I was like, you know what? I don't think that's the way you say her name, but she's having a monster year because not only was she the star of this movie, she's also one of the stars of The Zone of Interest, and those were the 2 most successful movies coming out of the Cannes Film Festival. And if her name sounds familiar, it's because, at least to American audiences, she made a big splash back in 2016 or 17 with the movie Toni Erdmann, which at one point was being discussed as possibly being remade as a Hollywood movie. I was like, no, just go see Toni Erdmann. I can't stand it when a cool foreign film comes along and Hollywood immediately says, oh, well, we need to do a crummy, kind of dumber, like less sophisticated American remake. It's like, just go see the movie if it's that good. In any case, I ended up sitting through a really cool Sandra Hüller double feature yesterday. And what was interesting is how not only was she incredible in both movies also feature really memorable and really hysterical performances by dogs. As I was watching Anatomy of a Fall, I was like, oh, this is the best performance by a dog that I will see all year. Then The Zone of Interest, even the Zone of Interest is a very bleak, grim, disturbing movie in a lot of ways, but it has a delightful dog performance that kind of adds a little levity throughout the experience. But that is neither here nor there. All I'll say is that the dog features prominently in the plot of Anatomy of a Fall. And it's funny, like even talking about it, I can't call it a murder mystery or a suicide mystery or a death mystery because the nature of the death is so up in the air. If I even specify what kind of movie this is, that is technically like I'm basically ruining the movie for people who have not yet seen it. But I'll give you the official premise as written on Wikipedia, just so you know what the basic premise is for the flick. Sandra, a German writer, is arrested for murder in France following her husband's death in the snow under mysterious circumstances. Having the couple's 11-year-old blind son as the only witness of her husband's death, Sandra tries to prove her innocence during the trial. And that more or less captures the gist of the story, but what makes this movie so delightful is all the various characters involved in the courtroom drama. I mean, the judge is incredible. The prosecuting attorney is truly extraordinary. And the defense is incredible as well. He's played by actor, hang on one second, Swan Arlad or Arlo. I don't know if I've ever seen him in a movie before. He is incredible. That was one of the biggest surprises and biggest revelations from the movie, as well as the child actor who plays the blind kid, Milo Machado Grainer. He was absolutely incredible. There's nobody phoning in a shitty performance here. The movie was cast very well from top to bottom. But as the old expression goes, if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. All these great actors would have nothing to do if they didn't have a great script. And I was just so amazed at how the screenplay managed to avoid every cheesy cliche, every cheesy shortcut that we associate with courtroom dramas. And let's face it, most courtroom dramas are terrible, where you can like say the lines by the characters as they're coming out of their mouths because they've all become just so predictable at this point. In the 90s, like erotic thrillers, every single erotic thriller had like 30 minutes inside a courtroom where you could just say the lines as the actors were saying them. But this movie managed to outwit me and outsmart me and surprise me with every twist and turn. And I don't know if the name of the film is a direct or subconscious homage to Otto Preminger's film Anatomy of a Murder, but if you're looking for yet another courtroom drama that'll blow your fucking mind, Anatomy of a Murder might be my favorite courtroom drama that I've ever seen, so this film, Anatomy of a Fall, is very aptly named. I mean, first and foremost, just the structure is interesting because you have a French court, but a German suspect, and they're speaking in English as kind of like middle ground, but they're constantly kind of switching and bobbing and weaving between the three languages. But when it comes to the mystery, without giving anything away, all I'll say is that this movie does a brilliant job of examining creative rivalries because both the husband and the wife are both authors, deals with creative inspiration and where you might draw it from, especially when it comes to stories about death and killing. Are you drawing from real life or are you making things up? But it also tackles creative frustration or artistic ambitions, especially jealousy between two creative people. Sexual and artistic insecurity are a huge part of this story, and I thought it did a brilliant job of showing how some people can erect their own obstacles as an excuse for when they fail. I mean, people who are creative as they enter their 40s and their 50s, not everybody gets to be an absolute superstar, and so a lot of people start wrestling with like, have they managed to achieve some of their aspirations or some of their dreams? And when they haven't, some people react to it in really unpleasant ways. And I just thought this movie did a brilliant job of getting inside the head of the characters. And I enjoyed it so much that I frequently found myself laughing out loud, not because it was funny, but just because I was delighted. And in between screenings, I heard some people complaining about all the laughter throughout the movie because it's not a comedy. It's got some humor. But I turned around and said, I apologize, but I'm one of those weirdos that was laughing at inappropriate times. But it wasn't because I was laughing, quote, at the movie's expense. I was laughing at just the joy of seeing a really cool movie with really cool performances, especially scenes where you have a bunch of people in a courtroom debating to what degree a text by an author might be a confession about their own life or just an exercise in pure imagination, or where they might bleed into each other. And so if you are a fan of kind of true life murder stories and or mysteries and thrillers that are pure fiction, I think the audience for this movie could potentially be huge if it's marketed in the appropriate fashion. And so as I was sitting in the theater yesterday, I was a very happy movie fan. I just hadn't seen a really cool genre film with this much intelligence in a long time, and I only have one real criticism against the movie, It's too goddamn long. It's 2.5 hours. I don't think the movie has 2.5 hours of story, but it's probably got 2 hours and 10 minutes or 2 hours and 15 minutes. Like the very end of the movie, it almost is like to use like a basketball term, like they're letting the shot clock run out. And I was like, you know what? Either use your running time or let us get the fuck out of here. But judging from the applause and the response of the crowd, I think the audience was more or less into it. Although I had one total asshole sitting in front of me where they would check their phone like every 30 minutes just to see what time it was, and they'd put it down like, you know what time the movie starts, you know what time it ends. You don't need to check to see what time it is because the movie's going to end when it ends. And if you're bored, leave, but don't check to see when the movie might be over because that's not going to make the movie end any sooner. That's one of the most annoying traits in a movie imaginable. What time it is at that precise moment is totally irrelevant if you know what time the movie started and what time the movie ends. So it's like you don't need to check. Or if you do need to check, leave the theater and get the fuck out of there and stop making our lives miserable. And I don't know if Anatomy of a Fall will end up being my favorite movie at the New York Film Festival, but it probably has a pretty good fighting chance at this point of being one of the stronger films that I will see. But I hope I will see a bunch of good flicks over the next couple weeks. But I also saw yesterday, as I mentioned before, Strange Way of Life by Pedro Almodovar, which is a 30-minute Western, or at least on the surface it's a Western, but it's a Western starring Pedro Pascal and Ethan Hawke, and they're both gunmen, they're both real good at what they do, and they're on a collision course over the fate of somebody who may or may not be guilty of murder. But what complicates this collision course is that these two characters used to screw very aggressively and very passionately a long time ago. And so only Pedro Almodovar knows how to tell these stories in this fashion. And I must admit, I've only seen a handful of his movies over the years. I mean, starting in the late 80s and early 90s, I was watching movies like Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down. Then later on, movies like Todo Sobre Mi Madre. I mean, he's a dynamite director with a giant filmography at this point, and he's been working like steadily throughout that time. So it was cool to get a little surprise short in between these two movies. I'm not going to claim that it's Pedro Almodovar's best movie, nor Pascal's, nor Hawke's, but if you want to see a gay, conflicted romance with a lot of violence, or if you just like Westerns, Strange Way of Life, it's being distributed by Sony Pictures, but as a short film, I don't know if it's going to play before other movies or be released on its own. I don't know what the release plan is so far for this flick. But as a fan of Westerns, in particular a fan of the movie The Wild Bunch, I won't say what scene or how, but there is a very clear, overt homage to The Wild Bunch at one point, but twisted in typical Almodovar fashion, which I think some people will be happily surprised by or shocked by. You be the judge. But I also got to see Zone of Interest, Jonathan Glazer's latest flick, an adaptation of loose adaptation of Martin Amis's novel from 2014. This is coming out in the U.S. on December 8th through A24. It might be way too early to review this movie, although I guess people reviewed it back in May during the Cannes Film Festival. But this is one of my most anticipated movies of the festival, but I'm not quite sure if I'm ready to review it or not. It was a real tough sit after watching one long movie and a short movie before it even started, because this is a grim, relentless, and unconventional look at the Holocaust. You basically have a German family that is trying to make a life for themselves in this beautiful home that is just on the other side of the wall of the giant concentration camp in Auschwitz. And what makes the movie so disturbing is that you're not actually inside the concentration camp seeing the horrors unfold. You're just seeing like the plumes of smoke with like the ovens running round the clock, and you're just like, oh my God, this is so dark. And so the fact that they withhold the horrors of Auschwitz almost makes them more terrifying when you see just how blasé people are going about their everyday lives when it comes to raising children and sending them to school and that sort of thing. It's a brutal movie. I don't know if it'll make the same kind of splash as Under the Skin, which is Glazer's last movie from 10 years ago, which had ScarJo, bearing all, which obviously helped sell a lot of tickets. But what I found fascinating about Zone of Interest was how, because of its stubborn refusal to sermonize or to tell you what to think or how to think, it is strangely effective and powerful because it's just presenting you with a way of life that slowly but surely would just fill you with like horror and loathing. And I found it just devastatingly powerful. And I think it's going to be a lesson to a lot of less sophisticated filmmakers out there, where you don't have to hold the audience by the hand and spell everything out or make everything obvious. audience members are able to see something and make up their own minds. And don't worry, more often than not, they're going to come to the right conclusion. But I feel like Zone of Interest is one of those 10 a.m. espresso movies. And what I mean by that, like a morning movie when you're sharp, when you're clear, when you've just had your coffee and you're like, all right, like my mind is wide open, my eyes are wide open, lay it on me. I don't recommend it after like a long day at work. I don't recommend it after like a big dinner where you've had a bunch of wine, where you're feeling a little sleepy. It's going to knock a lot of people out because it's very, steady in its pacing. It's not trying hard at all to quote unquote entertain the audience. And obviously when you're talking about the fucking Holocaust, no one should be looking for a movie that's going to entertain the audience. But you'll know what I'm talking about when you see it, and I do think I need to see it for a second time before I can review it properly. So I think I'm going to wait on my review of Zone of Interest until December, unless I just have like some great revelation over the next 24 hours and I'm like, I'm ready to review Jonathan Glazer's latest flick. At any rate, as I said before, my New York Film Festival experience is off to a fantastic start, and I loved how in between the screenings, rather than just having silence in the auditorium, they decided this year to play classic music from really cool classic movies. Like I was sitting there, I was like, wait a second, this is the soundtrack to Once Upon a Time in America. It wasn't like they were saying, oh, let's play like the soundtrack to Back to the Future. Like, no, let's go for some deep cuts, for some legit classic flicks. So there are no more press screenings this weekend, but I'll be back at it at 10 a.m. on Monday morning for Hayao Miyazaki's latest flick, The Boy and the Heron. I hope they're going to play it in Japanese with subtitles, but I don't know if I'll be getting the dubbed version or not. But I love Hayao Miyazaki. I mean, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away. I mean, he's made some of the best animated movies in like movie history. I mean, irrespective of whether or not you like animated movies or live action, Hayao Miyazaki is one of the world's great filmmakers. And he's getting up there in years. I know he said he's making another movie. This might be the last movie that I see by Hayao Miyazaki, so I'm determined to soak it up and enjoy it to the best of my ability. But I'll be back at y'all with a review of that as fast as humanly possible. I'm also in the middle of reviewing Fall of House of Usher, the Netflix show by Mike Flanagan, but I need to finish that today. That review will probably be up tomorrow, but I can't thank you enough for watching this video and sticking with me. If you enjoyed it, please consider hitting that notification bell, liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and hunt me down on social media at Colbrax if you want to talk more about foreign films, international films, independent films, film festivals, whatever. But thanks again for watching. I greatly appreciate it, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.